Welcome back to Q&A Modeling Bootcamp. In previous lessons, I taught you the perils of blindly importing tables and some techniques for shaping your model into something more appropriate for consumption by users of Power BI. This time, I'll show you a number of model annotations which can significantly improve your user's experience with Power BI. Model annotations are features that are utilized for making Power BI work better across the board. Their primary impact on Q&A is in the following areas: which columns are available for Q&A, automatic behavior for how to aggregate various columns, automatic sorting behavior, automatic visualization type selection, and automatic selection of which columns to display for tables. The first annotation that you'll frequently use is the Hide in Report View property. This setting makes the table or column effectively invisible to Power BI and to Q&A. You'll want to set this property on any column where the content is essentially meaningless to the user. This includes things like auto-generated primary key columns, practically every foreign key column, and any sort of utility metadata columns that you have lying around. Things that track, for example, when the last row was edited. You'll also want to set this on numeric columns for which you've already created a measure in order to avoid ambiguity. The next thing you're going to want to do is set the data type and data category on any columns where the import guessed incorrectly. So for example, there may be string columns that are actually dates or integers. In addition, data category information is used for things like recognizing the terms when and where, and for selecting the default visualization type. So for example, if you set a geography data category, such as city or country, then queries that use that column will naturally be displayed on a map. Similarly, setting a data category of year will cause queries that use that column to display on a line chart. Next, you'll want to set the default summarization and sort by properties on select columns. As you saw in the previous lesson, there are times when Power BI will automatically aggregate numeric columns. To override this behavior for columns which are technically numeric but don't really act as numbers, you'll want to set the default summarization property to Don't Summarize. You'll want to do this for year, month, and day columns, and columns that contain numeric identifiers. There are other cases where automatic summaries are desired, but the correct default aggregate is not a sum. For example, when summarizing ages, you'll likely want an average rather than a sum. Sort by allows you to indicate that a particular string column should not sort alphabetically, but rather should be sorted by some other column in the table that is numeric. This is useful in cases like month name, where you can sort by the month number column, or a shirt size, where you can sort by the size number column. The next thing you'll want to do is set the default display fields for each of your tables. For example, when you ask List the orders, you probably don't want to see every single column in the orders table. Instead, you might want to see the order ID, order date, ship date, and customer ID. For some tables, however, some of the interesting columns to display may be in other tables. To handle this, you would first add them to this table as cloned copies. You do this using the related function inside of Power BI to extract values from a remote table for which there is a foreign key. You would then mark that clone as hidden, so it doesn't introduce ambiguity, and use it in the default display fields. For some tables, you'll also want to set the default label property. The default label should be set when there exists a single column that is the name or ID for items in the table. It will be used instead of the default display fields when values from the table are used in a chart rather than a table. For example, if you ask, count the number of orders for each customer, it would be nicer to see a bar chart with just customer names as labels, rather than a table with a bunch of different customer columns. The next step after annotating your model is to add synonyms to the tables and columns contained within it. Synonyms are simply the terms by which your users refer to the objects in the model. By default, that includes the table or column name itself. So if you've cleaned up your table names and column names in model shaping, the synonyms you get by default should work quite well. But you'll want to enhance that with additional terminology that the users are expecting. The terminology you add is domain-specific, So you'll want to interview your domain experts so that you include as synonyms terms that they are used to using on a daily basis. Don't just go out and find some thesaurus and pull in every possible synonym of these terms. By doing that, you're likely introducing a bunch of ambiguity that's unnecessary, both with other terms in the model and with terms that are not in the model but might have another definition for your users. The primary synonym is the term that is used in the restatement, so it is a good idea to make sure that that term is unique. That will help your users understand that the system is interpreting their questions correctly, rather than guessing that the term they used actually means something entirely different. Finally, when choosing synonyms, use the root form of the term. Since these are nouns, that means you should use the singular form. So for example, if I want the term salespeople to show rows in the employees table, I should add salesperson as a synonym for the employees table, not salespeople. Note, however, that the system will try to detect when you've accidentally typed in a plural. So under most circumstances, you can get away with it. But in some cases, the system will guess wrong, so do try to use the root form. The one exception to this is measures. Measures tend to be inherently plural. So for example, net sales is the right term for the net sales column, rather than net sale. So for our third exercise, we're going to annotate the model that we built during the last lesson. We'll set don't summarize and data category on columns that need it, fix up incorrect data types, set the default display fields and default label on the tables, and add a handful of synonyms to various tables and columns. And the most critical step, validate the questions we had working before, check previously broken questions to see what we've enabled by fixing things in the model, and add some additional questions to our test questions list.